Terraform provides a very good documentation about the authenticating the Azure Provider. How do you authenticate to Azure Provider in various ways? But still, people find difficulties using each of those. So basically, there are four of them, but configuring each of them onto different need basis, people find some difficulties. In this particular video, I'm going to explain when and how to use those different authentication mechanisms. Hi, this is Rakesh Suryavanshi. I'm going to explain you how to use the authentication option for Azure Provider with Terraform. Let's begin. With Azure Provider, gets four different authentication mechanisms. First is Azure CLI. Second, Azure Client ID and Client Secret. Next is Azure Client ID with Client Certificate, and the Azure Authentication using the Managed Service Identity. We'll look at four of them one by one. Let's look at the first one, which is Azure CLI. This one you are going to use when you are running the Terraform with on your local machine. So this is the code which I'm using it right now throughout all my series videos. In this, you can see I have one locale. It's just defining some of the local variables. Then I have the main file, which is just what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to create a resource group and then returning the output as an output variable. It's just a simple Terraform code just to create a resource group. Our objective is just to learn the authentication mechanism. That's why it's just simple query which I've written in the Terraform provider. Now next I have the provider.tf file. This is the file I've created here to define all my different types of provider which I'm using in this Terraform setup. So at the moment, I'm just using the AzureRm as a provider. So I've defined in my provider file, I've defined the Terraform provider as a AzureRm. Now if you are a beginner, you may ask a question, do I need to set up a new file, a provider file, a separate, is it a reserved file name, provider.tf? So answer is no. It is just the way I've defined my file in a segregate manner so that if I need to go and modify it in a different piece of code, then I have the clear visibility which section is doing what work. But it's not necessary, it's totally up to you. You can define a single tf.tf file, let's say main.tf file. You can have all your locales, main content, provider content, and into the Terraform file. It's just you need one main.tf file and then one variables.tf file. This is variable.tf is just, again, as you know, this is just a reserve file which will contain all the list of variables which are going to use inside your Terraform setup. So to continue from there, in my Terraform provider, as I mentioned earlier, I have the Terraform block defined, wherein at the moment the code is commented because I don't want to say okay which is the backend type. We'll discuss the backend type in a separate video. But in the next section, I'm defining the provider as an AzureRm, and the version I'm defining is 2. It could be more than at least 2.20.0, and then below that there are a couple of lines of code which I've commented out, which I'm going to use when I'm going to use it, the Terraform provider authentication mechanism with client ID and client secret, or client ID and client certificate basically. But for now, this is what I need. It's just a provider block and the version of the AzureRm provider, which version we want to target, and this is the feature block which you can use in from the Terraform version 2. Onwards. Feature block is the must have a block which you need to define. You can define the key vault configuration here, not key vault configuration in the sense how do you create a key vault. It's just more of a enabling the soft delete and all those features within the key vault. Those are the kind of setup you want to define. Then this is the feature block which you are going to use here. So this is just a provider section. I have it here. Apart from that, there are some variables which have defined here. So what are the different types of variables which I can use it here? So I've listed down those variables. This is just the only setup, though I have the some of the YAML deployment file, but you can ignore it for now because we are running the Terraform code just from the local. So I'm going to open my Windows terminal, which you can use this shortcut key Shift Control tilde operator in MacBook, and then you can run the. I need to route to the directory. I'm going to route it to the directory where all my Terraform contents are. So my directory is Azure DevOps Introduction, and now I'm going to run first of all Terraform init. So at the moment, I'm going to run the init command, and let's see if I'm going to run the Terraform, and it is successful now, as you can see. Now next is let's run the Terraform plan and see if it works fine. As you can see, I got the error which says authenticating using the Azure CLI is only supported as a user. What do I mean by that is I need login onto the machine with the my Azure account with Azure CLI. If you do not have the Azure CLI installed on your machine, I highly recommend you to install the Azure CLI exe on your machine, which can be easily available in the Microsoft website. You just need to find out and try for, let's say, Azure CLI. So whichever operating system you are using it, download the Azure CLI according to that. So for example, I have used the Microsoft for my MacBook. I've gone through and run these commands and installed the Azure CLI on my MacBook. So now as I already have the Azure CLI, so what do I need to do is I need to go ahead and use the Azure login command, which is what this particular authentication mechanism says. Use the Azure login. Azure login. So I'm going to run the Azure login commands, which will open the command line for me. I'm going to use the my Microsoft Azure account. So this is my Microsoft Azure account, which I'm going to use it. You need to provide username and password. I have already stored my username and password on my machine. That's why it's not asking me to use for my username and password. If I switch back, you can see the account is successfully authenticated with the AzureRm. So my Azure provider has got the authentication set up with the Azure login command. Now let's run the Azure Terraform plan command and let's see if the plan is getting generated or not. So as you can see, this time the plan has generated successfully, and the plan says it is going to create a resource group in the target environment. Yeah. So this is how you can set up the, you can use the Azure CLI for authenticating to your Azure provider. Next, we are going to look at the Azure RM provider authentication with Terraform using service principal, which is client ID and client secret. Let's see how do you set up the client ID secret first of all on your Azure subscription, and then how do you use those client ID and secret within your Terraform commands. I'm onto my Azure subscription. For this demonstration, I'm going to use this one. I have the administrator access on this subscription because I am the owner of the subscription. Some of the actions which you are going to provide to set up the authentication with client ID secret using service principal requires high level of privilege. So make sure you have the enough access. It's not necessary to have the administrator level access, but some of them requires access which is more than a contributor. So let's go to the Azure Active Directory, click on the app registrations. I'm going to click on the new registration. If the layout is going, by the time when you are watching this video, if the layout is going to be changed for creating the app registration, then use that one. If you're not sure about that, I would recommend to use the command line tools available to create the app registration. It should be fairly simple and easy to create the app registration. For now, I'm going to give the app registration name as in Azure SPN and then dev for the dev account. Let's click on the register. This should create one application app registration for me. Let's note some of the details of the app registration which has been created just now. Let's create the client ID. Let's copy the client ID. I'm going to be copying onto my notepad. So I'm going to call it client ID. Let's store the tenant as well, which is this one. I'm going to call the, now let's go to the subscription. So at the moment I have only subscription, which is my Visual Studio Professional subscription. I'm going to copy my subscription ID. Subscription ID equals to this one. So I've noted down client ID, secret, and subscription. Now I'm going back to the app registration. I think I missed something over there. So let's go to the app registrations. Terraform has been there. Now here you need to go and create the client ID secret, which you are going to use for authentication and authorization. So I'm going to create it for, let's say, never, or doesn't matter. This is just for the demonstration purpose. So I'm going to create only for 1 year. I'm going to copy this. Anyways, I'm going to delete the SPN after the demonstration. So let's say call it client secret and then use it as is. Now, what I need to do is, in order to use this particular service principal onto the subscription, this SPN basically requires the contributor level access onto the subscription. So any subscription which you are targeting to use against your service principal, you need to give the contributor access to your service principal. So I go to the role assignment, click on add and role assignment, check the role as a contributor, and then search for your service principal which you have created just now. So I've created this service principal. I'm going to click on save. So now you can see I have granted the access to my service principal, the contributor access to my service principal on my subscription. So now using the, what does it mean is using the client ID and secret, which is service principal, I should be able to provision any resource within this particular subscription as a contributor. I'm back on my Visual Studio Code where we are going to test our service principal which we have created just now. Before I begin, let's test if I'm able to run the Terraform plan command without using the service principal. So I'm running the plan command. So as expected, I'm getting the error which says you cannot use the Azure Authentication using the Azure CLI because it is not supported as a user. So the only option I can use is using the Azure login, which I've used in the first section. Now, how do I use the service principal here? So to use the service principal which we have created just now, there are two options. First, set up the service principal secrets or the service principal values as an environment variables to your machine and then run your Terraform commands so that when the Terraform process runs, it first of all checks if there are variables available and the values are defined within the provider blocks like this, which you can see on the line number from line number 8 to 11. Or if not, then second it will check if the Terraform provider has able to got the values from the environment variable section. So let's check the first option, which is setting up the client ID service principal values into the Terraform provider as an environment variable. Let's run the Terraform export command to export all these service principal values onto the on your Mac machine. If you are using the Mac, then you need to use the export command. If not, then you need to use the, if you're using Windows machine, then you need to use the set item command, which you can use it to set the items. So I'm going to use the client ID, which I've copied already. I'm going to paste it, set. Just I'm going to test it whether I'm able to retrieve the values or not. Yes, I can retrieve it, which is good. Now next I'm going to export quickly the ARM dash secret. So all good. Let's clear the terminal. I'm going to run the Terraform init command just to make sure I'm able to initialize it. And finally, I'm going to run the Terraform plan command. I'm hoping this time it should work fine. As you can see, as it is expected, I'm able to run the Terraform plan command successfully, and which is it's saying that the plan is going to run the Terraform and it will create the source code. Once we are going to run the apply command. This is how you use Azure Provider and Terraform with the help of Service Principal to connect to Azure subscription. Now let me unset these values, such as ARM client. So I'm going to print this. I'm not expecting any values, which is good. So if I'm going to run the Terraform plan command again, I'm expecting the error again, which is good. Now let's move back to the second option, which is using the service principal with the help of the variables. So what we need to do is command line. I'm going to uncomment this, save it, and then go to the provider and the variable section as well. I'm going to uncomment these as well. So now I have the variables. Once you have the variable defined, you can use those variables by calling the Terraform plan command and pass on the variable values individually, or you can also pass on the variable values with the variable files as well. Here I'm trying to pass on the variable values while calling the Terraform plan command. Make sure the variables are case sensitive. So as you can see, once passing the variables in a correctly fashion, I'm able to run the Terraform plan command successfully, as I was able to run it from the by passing the service principal values or setting the service principal values into the environment variables. So both of the approach are correct. It's just the way, it's up to you how do you use it. Third option is use the Azure Provider with the authentication with the service principal using the client ID and the client certificate password. So for that, you need to create a certificate which you can use OpenSSL, and then create a certificate and then use the certificate to authenticate your Azure subscription. Let's see how do you create the OpenSSL. How do you use the OpenSSL to create a certificate? As per the instructions given on the Terraform website, you can create the certificate. I've used the same command line which is given exactly in this website, and I was able to create the OpenSSL certificate. I've stored it on my machine onto my Mac folder, and then I've run a couple of these commands which allows me to generate the PFX file and also set up the certificate which I can use it for my service principal authentication. So as you can see, I have the certificate folder and the files are created. So I have the public key of my certificate, public file, and then the private file, which is PFX, and then which I can use it, which is located on this particular folder. So now I will go back to the Terraform code, and let's see. Before this, I would like to run the Terraform command, plan command, just to make sure I'm not able to run it. As you can see, I'm not able to run the Terraform plan command because I've just commented out all my section which I was using it earlier to pass on the Terraform service principal ID and secrets as in parameters which was given on these commands, which I just show you just as a reminder. Even though if I'm going to pass on this, it says invalid value because I've just commented out the variables. Let's go and provide the access to the certificate on your search principal. So what I did is, I'll just close this out just for your understanding. So what I did is, I have gone to the same service principal. I'm using the same one, but if you like, you can create a new service principal. So in this particular service principal, what I did is, I've created I've removed the client secret portion because I'm not going to use the client secret in this particular section. The objective is to use the client's certificate. So let's go ahead and upload this certificate. Once you click on the upload section, navigate to the folder where you have the certificate, and then upload the cert file directly from here. I'm going to choose upload the cert file, which is uploaded successfully. Now again, this particular or any search principal which you have created, the search principal needs to have the contributor, at least contributor access on your subscription in order to run the Terraform onto your Azure account. So now if I go back to the my certificate section on the Terraform, and then let's see what is given, the same thing. What you can do is, you can either use the environment variables to authenticate the certificate based authentication for your Terraform, or you can use the variables defined on your the Terraform configuration and then pass the variable values while calling the Terraform command files. So both of them are possible. At the moment, I have stored this certificate files location as an environment variable, as you can see on my screen, and then I've specified this is the location of the certificate which I am going to use. In this case, I'm using the PFX file. And just remember, when I uploaded the file, certificate file onto the Terraform on the service principal in Azure, I have uploaded the CFX file, and here I'm using the PFX file, cert file basically. Pardon me. Now let's run the Terraform command again. Let's see if I'm able to run the Terraform plan command from here. So I've set up both certificate path and certificate password, both the variables. So as you can see, I'm able to run and the plan command successfully. You can pass on the client certificate password and certificate path on your Terraform variables, and the variables can be declared within your Azure RM provider sections like this. So like we have done the setup for client ID and secret, wherein we are passing the client ID value and the secret values while running the command. Similar to that, you can run the command by passing these variables values. For example, I'll show you. Similar to that, wherein you are passing the client ID secret, and this similar, you can pass on the client, instead of client ID and secret, you can pass on the client certificate password and certificate path, and then you can run the Terraform command. Or basically, this is not just only for the running the command locally or the Terraform code locally, but it is the highly recommended way, the SPN way. Basically, either you use the client ID certificate, or you use the client ID certificate password, or use the client ID secret. If you are running the Terraform code from your pipelines, whether it is a Git pipeline, GitHub pipeline running from the GitHub or Git or any of the DevOps pipeline, then it is a highly recommended way to use the service principal to run your Terraform code. Next and the last one is running the Terraform code via the managed service identity. So if you can see in the managed service identity, what you can do is you can the machine where your from where your Terraform code is going to be executed, you can enable the managed service identity and then grant the access to that machine to your Azure subscription. So whenever you are going to run the Terraform, execute Terraform code from that particular machine, that Terraform code is going to use the managed service identity to execute your Terraform code basically. So this is the configuration which is given right now. How do you set up the managed service identity for your Terraform code? And once the managed service identity is set up, you can define your Terraform provider code to run it via the use of MSI. I don't have the virtual machine created, that's why I won't be able to give you a demonstration, but the document is fairly easy and simple to set up the managed service identity. I hope you're aware about the managed service identity in Azure. Then it is the right way to use it, the managed service. In my opinion, wherever I work on the Terraform, I always use the client ID and secret and the client ID and certificate authentication in most of the cases. I prefer AzureRm login or AZ login way of authentication when I run the Terraform locally on my machine or on my personal subscription. I hope this was useful. Thanks for watching, guys.